yeah, we got to overturn.
You're listening to the E-Men, inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit.
This special edition of Cops was filmed with the cooperation of the New York City Transit Police. All suspects are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Any excuse I have to roll out that introduction, I will. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 243, the E-Men, inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, Volume 4 of Talk to Me, Life on the NYPD's hostage negotiation team, and that was with James Shanahan, who had a big hand in training a lot of ESU guys over the years in hostage negotiation. Good talking with Jimmy, and he carried the show. I was underneath the weather, as you guys know. I unfortunately came down with the COVID bug. It bit me over the weekend. I'm feeling a lot better now. I'd like to thank all of you for your well wishes. It really means a lot. Thankfully, feeling much better these days. And of course, as I mentioned, the promo for this show, it is Volume 30, and we started this mini-series last year, and it kind of became a passion project. The first guest for it was John Lampkin, and here we are. Many great E-Cops I've talked to later, this Volume 30, with my next guest, who really had quite the gamut in a 20-year career between two different police departments. He came on in 1981 originally with the New York City Transit Police, hence the Transit Cops intro, and he got into rescue work early, 3 years on patrol, and then 1984, the Emergency Medical Rescue Unit, and he'd stay there until 1995 when the merge happened. And when that happened, he went over to 10 Truck in Queens, where he'd stay until retiring in the summer of 2001. So 17 of his 20 years in rescue work between, like I said, two different agencies, as we'll chronicle tonight. And that for this Volume 30, the milestone Volume 30 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, Mr. Ken Schnetzler. Ken, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good to see you, and everybody in the chat as well. Tuning in tonight, Pat Bogan specifically says hi, Mike, hi, Kenny, hi, all. And of course, I wanted him to show up for this because you worked with him in 10 Truck, and look, he did not disappoint. Look at little Kenny, says one, Mr. Stefanakis. So he's doing it in.
Mr. Stefanakis, the longevity man.
Of course. The man who retired in the year 3000, as I often like to joke on this podcast. And thanks to everybody else for tuning in tonight. Before I get to the interview, Joe Maliga, he's always here, as is Jay Driscoll and Scotty Wagner. Last but certainly not least, my man Scotty. And hey, Ray Ruiz is here too. He says, hey, Ken, looking good. Good to see you, Ray. Thanks for being here as always, brother. And anybody else that tunes in tonight, I look forward to welcoming you in too. So I think when we were talking off the air, refresh my memory. Are you a lifelong resident of Queens, born and raised? Born and raised, yes. Okay. All right. What part of Queens?
I started out in Ridgewood, which I think at the time, technically it was Brooklyn. Then they redrew the lines and I became Queens resident overnight. Ridgewood, and now I live out in Kew Gardens.
Okay. I've been to Kew Gardens a couple of times. Nice place. You know, I got to say, I got to go to Queens more. It's there's some busy parts, I'm sure, but compared to other boroughs like Manhattan and the Bronx, it strikes me, at least from an outsider's perspective. I was down there a few months ago to see the Mets, as a quieter borough. You know, not when you get to Citi Field, but other parts besides that immediate area. It's quieter, more peaceful borough, at least in some parts. Well, in some areas, it's just a disaster with the local traffic being what it is. It's a very congested borough. There's a lot of people, a lot of cars, and we're losing lanes of traffic to the bike lanes and the parking and all. It's not easy. And rush hour is rush hour. Sometimes it can take you half an hour just to go 3 or 4 miles in a straight run down one of the major avenues. But it's a big diversified community.
I would say probably Forest Hills, and now maybe Ridgewood and Middle Village is becoming as popular as they've ever been, and quite the nightlife and shopping areas during the day as well.
Yeah, you got your mix. I feel like in Queens and Staten Island, there's that healthy mix of, again, not for every part of the borough, but certain parts where you have that quiet residential life. But if you want to be in the city for a day, you're not too far away from it. Hop on the train, go to the busy parts. You get your healthy amount of both.
Right. Yeah, we're fortunate enough. We have a couple of Long Island Railroad stations nearby.
Yeah.
So again, for a small, an additional fee, you could be in Manhattan in like 18 minutes. So right in the center of Manhattan, it's great.
Yeah. Talking with Ken Schnetzler. This is volume 30, the milestone volume of the EMET inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Tommy Ridges is tuning in via LinkedIn. He says hi to everybody, and good to see you, Tommy, as always. So did you have any, and hello to you too, Matt Shirley, did you have any family on the job? Or are you the first one?
I'm the first.
Okay. What made you want to come on the job?
Well, I had gone from, as a teenager, I got involved with a local volunteer ambulance corps. And I got a taste for emergency work like that. But you had to wait till you're 18 to ride on the ambulance. So I had joined the Coast Guard and went from high school into the Coast Guard. I was still 17 and turned 18 in boot camp. It was a different time in the late 70s. The city was having their financial crisis and the hiring freeze and layoffs. And then it started to thaw out in like 1980 or so. And so many of my friends, and like I mentioned about the ambulance corps, so many of my friends, including actually my spouse and so many other of our friends, they all met their spouses at the ambulance corps. And it became a great opportunity, again, socially, but to give back a little something and for some of us to get involved in the emergency field. Then, like I said, my friends were throwing their name in the hat for the different departments. As you know, there was 3 different departments back in the day. Fire department, and next thing you know, I'm being courted by the transit police, and the timing worked out well. I left active duty with the Coast Guard, and a couple of weeks later, I got sworn into the transit police.
Did you have a preference, or did you not care just as long as you got on the job?
Well, I had taken the individual transit police test first, and then the city test after that. And I just went with whoever called me first, pretty much,
Okay.
have a job.
Well, that's a good attitude to have. And of course, the benefits help too. I mean, you're still going to get those benefits all the same.
Yep.
But this is such a unique beat, as I've covered with all the transit and housing guys who've been on, because you're seeing the same people every day, but they're constantly, well, they're in transit, no pun intended, because in a housing project, you can count on somebody, they're going to go to and from their apartment, where they're going to be, or at least you have a general idea. You might not see the same people every day. And even then, if you do see them frequently, if that's the train they take to go to work or to get to whatever destination they have to, they're always on the go. You don't have a lot of time for interaction, and you have to be cognizant of everything. That's daunting for a 20-something coming on the job, even with the prior emergency experience that you had, especially with the amount of people that take the subway daily in the city. Who helped you learn, and what helped you kind of stay in the moment and not overthink things?
Well, again, knowing what I knew going into the transit police, because I rode the subway to and from high school every day into Manhattan, so I was I was familiar with the subways. But we were fortunate; we had quite a number of seasoned veterans. Again, we had a separate transit police academy. It lasted for 2 classes. It was just a logistics thing and a timing thing that we all used to go to 20th Street, and then we would finish up, and then some would go to housing, some would go to transit. But my class was delayed. The city had a class already in, so they found a old high school on 155th and 8th Avenue, and that was a challenge. But they put together a staff, and I like to, I give credit. We were trained by transit cops to be transit cops in the transit system, and that was the best part of it. We had actual cops that had experience, and then once you got out, you had a quote training officer for a few tours, and next thing you know, they cut you loose. So as you say, if you were a housing cop, you probably knew some of the residents up and down the escalators. The elevators. You would see them on a regular basis, but in the transit system, you didn't always have the same posts. So you would always see the same, 1,000 people at a shot, so whether whether you can remember any of them or not, you were you could engage in conversation when they too were waiting for the next train, and the conversation wasn't always the greatest because they needed to get somewhere. So, it was just one of those. You had to adapt. You had to adapt to the crowds.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you started in District 33 in
Yes.
1981, which is in Brooklyn. And, that was a busy district during that time. When you recall that station, what are some of your fondest memories or even greatest collars, if you had any?
Well, again, it was, you had to remember, we were in the early 80s. The city was trying to come back. And some of the greatest stations, some of the greatest situations were, mixing it up with the riding public, with some of your cohorts. Again, we were stations apart, so if you called an 85 or a 13, you would hope that the guys at the next stations would run upstairs like we would do and commandeer a taxi or a truck or something and ride down in the street to that station where you were mixing it up with somebody. But when you're in uniform, sometimes collars, unless they just fall at your feet, are kind of hard to come by because you're out there in uniform, and that's kind of like the way it was. But it's always satisfying. You would grab a guy beating the fair or a gal beating the fair, and come up with sometimes you can really luck out and come up with a gun. Or big thing back in the day was the 007 gravity knives. They were a dime a dozen, but they were a good collar.
No, of course.
Get you off the station for a few hours.
Yeah, one less weapon out there. And this is the Broadway Junction station, if I'm not mistaken?
Well, Broadway Junction, East New York, is where it's at now. They were remodeling it from what it used to be. So we were down the street outside, I think it was 2479 Fulton Street. Basically, it was just a 1-block walk to the station. So we had an outside building, we weren't in the system as they are today. So, that wasn't a big deal.
All right, good. When you reflect on that time, well, first off, generally, were you a night tour or a day tour kind of
guy? Back then I was doing days and 4 to 12s.
Okay.
And in the early days, as you know, many of us were hired to start putting cops back on the trains from 8 at night to 4 in the morning to combat the overnight crime. So, but that was a seniority thing. So once the next class came out, we pretty much all got boosted out of that. So I landed on a rotation for a few months, and then I was able to do days and PM. So that wasn't too terrible.
Eric Fries, who retired NYPD first grade detective, he was just on the show this past Wednesday, says guys used to take trains to avoid police. Guns were numerous on trains. You just had to stop them. And the transit police did a pretty good job of that. I think the TPF, particularly on those point-to-point rides, Franco Baraducci told me about that when he was on back in July, was pretty pivotal in, taking those kinds of weapons, not only off the trains, but also off the streets in general. This is volume 30 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit, retired NYPD E-Man, and both are transit police, original EMRU man, and of course, ESU Truck 10, Ken Schnetzler is our guest tonight. So during that time, 4 to 12 is interesting for me because you're talking about the rush hour and that people, it's one thing to have people in the morning getting to work. Now they're coming out of work. They got to get home. You know the deal. Even if they don't have kids, they got to get ready for the next day. If they have kids, if they have spouses to tend to, hey, even more craziness. So tell me about any differences and any unique experiences in that regard, given the timing of the day.
Basically, you hit it on the head right there. People are in a different mode when they're going to work. And it depends on what kind of a day they had. If they had a great day, there were smiles and they would say hello and thank you for being out there. And if they had a bad day, it wouldn't take much. It wouldn't take much to trigger people. So, with the crowd, somebody stepping on somebody's toes, bumping into them, that was always the challenge. But, just being out there. Remember too, we that was a period of time too where we were seeing the Guardian Angels. So everybody loved the Red Berets, but I think I would like to think everybody loved the blue uniforms as well. So except for the bad guys, but
yeah, they're not supposed to anyway. Yeah. Who cares? One person, not to make it somber, but it does warrant bringing her up, who worked in District 33 during that time. We talked about it off the air. It was Irma Lozada. Now, we all know the way that she died. It's very tragic. Obviously, she was the first female to ever die in the line of duty in the history of New York City in terms of the 3 police departments back then, having been killed in 1984. But, here was somebody that in the short time that she was a cop, she had 7 years between the auxiliary police and the transit police, really did a lot of great work. And she was very much ahead of her time. I've seen pictures of her, beautiful girl. And it seemed like with the things that people say about her, she was a beautiful person as well. When you look back at her, I don't know how well you knew her, but when you look back on her, what are some of your favorite memories of her?
Well, there was a group of us would stop at one of the local diners up at the academy. She was in my class. She wasn't in my company, but and we would bump into each other. We would sit around. A group of us had a larger table, and we'd have our breakfast up there or lunch, and then again, I would see her coming and going in the district, and sadly, we just memorialized her gravesite just recently in September. 38 years she's gone, and a nice contingent of uniform members from the district, some bosses, and PBA representation was there. And they kind of all looked at me. I was in civilian attire. And, they didn't quite recognize who I was. Once I got a chance to be introduced to the different folks that were there, it was nice. And sad to say that we've lost so many of our friends and colleagues over the years. But again, that was one that was a tough one for the city, tough one for us, losing the first female in the line of duty. You would never, we're all supposed to be equal and the same, but it's still it's somebody's daughter, could be somebody's wife. It was a tough one, but it's great that they still honor her life there at the cemetery in Woodside, and it's always great when I can make it out there to see that.
And I think she has a street named after her in Brooklyn, Irma Lozada Way, not too far from where she died. Yeah, it's very rare in New York City because it wouldn't happen again until, ironically, in September, 17 years later, when Morris Smith died on 9/11, and then another 16 years after that with Mia Sotis Familia. So you don't see a lot of, not that, again, it's still sad either way, regardless, obviously, but you don't see a lot of women police officers in New York or really across the country get killed that often. And I think because, and I'm not going to go into it, but because of the way she died, it especially shook up the city. Like you said, I think you summed it up pretty perfectly there.
Huh.
Yeah, but she's not forgotten. Eric Fries also adds, transit cops were very aggressive back in the day, very active cops underground. They also did these things by themselves. And that's true. You guys, and I give a lot of credit to, well, all 3 departments, of course, but I talk about this with the housing guys too, with the verticals that they would do in transit. You guys were really, this is not detracting from the NYPD, but for the most part, you got a cop in the NYPD walking a beat, at least he or she has a partner and they could rely on each other. And we've seen those partner systems work very well. And that's a credit to them doing the job the way it needs to be done. That's not always, or at least back then, it wasn't always the case in transit or housing, to where you guys were really the thinking man's cop, in that what you said, as I've said before on the show, or what you didn't say could have really dictated if a situation went poorly or wonderfully.
Yes. Out in the street, and that's the perception that people kind of talk about. When you're out in the street, you have a lot of different ways you could probably try to get away if there's a bad situation about to happen or started to happen. But in the subway, there's not much direction to go. And it's a scary, daunting location for anybody to be in. You're on a platform, and to anybody that looks like 100-foot drop to the tracks. But even though it's only a couple of feet, you still don't want to fall. You don't want to get pushed on the tracks, obviously. And it's very dangerous. Everything is a hard surface, dirty surfaces. And, some of the things that we were taught in the academy, plan out your mode of operation, know your next station. You're going to take somebody off of a moving train. Know where you're going to be. Make sure you have a good chance of having another cop nearby if you needed an assistance. Back in the day, then, 2-man patrol was not too big of a deal. We did not have 2-person patrol. Some stations during certain hours had dual patrol, but most of the time you were by yourself. So you would have, we had the J line out here, ran from Broadway Junction out to Queens Boulevard at the time. We had 14 stations, and you had them all by yourself.
Right.
And you had closed ends. You always had to go down and check. And back then, everybody had the 6-shot revolver, and you used to have your little backup 5-shot, and you always had to be ready. You never counted on your radio because, as you may be aware, our radios back in those days didn't work well at all. So like you said, you had to be a thinking person about, what am I going to do? Is it worth the, approaching somebody for nothing is a crazy thing. But if it's an actual, you get a report of a crime and the person fits the description, you got to take action. You just got to remember where you are and what you're doing. So, there's a lot of heads up.
No, of course. And I laugh. We can joke about this because thankfully, at least to my knowledge, guys weren't hurt too seriously, or gals weren't hurt too seriously. But it's like they just looked at these radios and just said, let's give them the crappiest radios we can possibly could think of. What are the radios that are going to work the worst? Okay, those. It boggles my mind how poor those radios work for you guys.
Well, what boggles the mind now is I can ride the subway and watch a video or talk on my phone for the most part, where we couldn't even talk on the greatest two-way wireless communicators that money could buy.
I know. I mean, if you could go back in time to I guess when you came on 82, 83, like they do in the movies, and say, by the way, we can do this now, they'd look at you like you're an EDP, and understandably so, because I think somebody told me this, one of my friends from the bomb squad, Danny McNally, that he was saying that you would have to go underneath a grate if you wanted the signal to get out. Is that true?
Sometimes, yes. If you could get closer to the tunnel, because it was a wire that served as an antenna, that helped get you connection. But it was just again one of those things. It was but we knew that going into it. We knew not to rely on them, and you took care of business, and then you got your perpetrator down to the booth and asked the clerk for the phone, and you would call it in on the phone. So,
So that brings us. Oh, go ahead. My apologies.
No, I was saying, just what we take for granted today, where again, even we got air conditioning in stations. You were lucky if you had an air conditioned train once in a while, but now, the creature comforts are out there for the riding public for a whopping $275.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. At least, and listen, I guess it makes sense, because if you're on a train in the middle of July and it's 95 degrees outside, you don't exactly want to be sweating on the train either. Talk about must. So I guess it makes sense. It's not a bad investment. I can understand. Makes New Yorkers a little less grumpier. So that brings us to 1984 and the Emergency Medical Rescue Unit. Was it your background in the ambulance corps that made you want to go there?
A little bit, probably. What they used to do was they would you would put in an application for it, and they would pick maybe 2 people, 3 people to come in for a couple of weeks, ride along with the different guys that were there, and see how you fit in, see how you handle yourself. And things like that. And fortunately, I had my military background, and I landed pretty good connection with a couple of the senior guys that were there. That one was still serving, and one that did serve, and they took a liking to me. And then pretty much the only way you got into that unit back then was either somebody retired or got promoted. And I was very lucky that 4 people were very fortunate, and they got promoted. And I was one of 4 folks that got called into the unit. So, yeah. So it worked out.
Small unit, too. Not a big unit. So was it harder to get into?
Yeah. Well, when I got in, I believe we had 24 or 26 people and 3 vehicles.
Wow.
And, we were just all over the 4 boroughs doing what we did. We would put 2 vehicles out on a day and a PM tour, and one of us on a midnight tour. And you had 4 boroughs to run around to and get to jobs. So it was a challenge. And then we slowly expanded. as we landed, so to speak, on the map. And then when Chief Bratton came to take over the transit police, he expanded it a little bit more. And I believe when we merged, we were up to 50 or 55 people, and we had 5 vehicles and a bunch of equipment that with any kind of a merger or acquisition in the business world, some of the assets are good to get picked up by the new company, and some of them we used as training stuff and things like that. But yeah, it was being in uniform in the transit police. You had routine patrol, you had the new canine, that was a popular thing, and then the EMRU. There was really not much else if you were going to be in uniform to look forward to if you didn't want to do just regular patrol in a district, which wasn't bad. Don't get me wrong, but just variety, I suppose.
Yeah, and with EMRU, I remember John Bushing bringing this up when I had him on, because I didn't even know that he was a transit rescue guy until he told me he started out in transit originally. And he was saying that getting around back then, because I forgot, you guys did not go to Staten Island because they didn't have any, I don't think they had any train stations out there, at least not at the time. I don't know if they have any now. But you guys, in his exact words, it was funny. We didn't have Google Maps back then, or GPS back then. So if you had to try to get to an emergency, because you bring up a good point, it's only 3 or 4 trucks at maximum 6, and that's good. But for 4 boroughs, you're getting back and forth. The traffic's crazy. You're in Brooklyn, but you got an emergency in Manhattan. The old school way, baby, the map, a physical map to try to get to a station.
Well, again, too, when the unit first started in the mid to late 70s, that was one of the things that they took into consideration. So a lot of the guys that got called to be part of that unit in the beginning were RMP drivers. Now, also too, each transit district only had 2 RMPs.
I was going to say, it wasn't a lot of them.
No, so you were if you were the top 4 or 5 guys, you had a seat in the car every day. So it took a while for the number 6, 7, or 8 guy in a district to get a seat in the RMP. But that was part of the thing. It was a small unit, and you needed to know the city. Not so much even for street locations. You needed to know where the subway stations were. And some of them, if you've ridden the system, are tucked into the most obscure locations that, people wouldn't even believe.
Right.
But, between your map and your personal knowledge of the city, that's how you got around,
No, of course, and Tommy Ridge's ads, no GPSs back then, yes. The good old Hackstrom maps.
Yes, sirree. Oh, I can't tell you how many of them you go through. But, good investment.
Yeah, and it's funny because I wanted to trace the origins of transit rescue, so I went, in preparation for this show, looking through Google. Of course, when in doubt, Google it. And it was 1977, and actually has a link to my hometown. The guy that originally proposed it was a Dartmouth grad. He was 19 at the time. Name was Dean Esserman, who later became chief of police in my town of New Haven, Connecticut. And Dean was one that like I said, he did it as a college study for a project. He recommended that the subway have a rescue unit on standby. And so he went to the transit police with this idea. They agreed. And I think it cost him like $75,000 back then to put this unit together. And it was a roving unit at the time, just one rescue unit that handled a variety of emergencies. And look what it expanded into by 1995.
I believe they one of the first vehicles was an old flower delivery van. Some would say that Dean probably lost the bet, or he was looking for extra credit, and he come up with this harebrained scheme of a transit emergency rescue unit. But the thing that was really on his side was, obviously, those were the days, as I said, I was in a volunteer ambulance corps, when New York City Health and Hospitals didn't really run an ambulance. They ran a hospital system, and they had a couple of trucks that would go pick up people as an ambulance. So one of the problems would be somebody gets sick, somebody has a heart attack, and they're having difficulty breathing or whatever. They have a medical emergency on a train. The crew would be very reluctant to want to touch them, let alone escort them off the train.
Right.
But then what do they do with them then? They can't just get back on their train and leave. This victim of, could be having a heart attack or some other major medical problem. So it was a combination of keeping the trains moving and getting help, getting people the help that they. That was part of the impetus of why the unit was started. But again, we think he lost the bet, Mr. Resserman.
No, he probably did, but you know what? It ended up working out because it had a great 18-year history. And the cops were joking at the end of that New York Times article dated October 18th, 1977, I believe, where, who said we only handle heart attacks, because it's that, but they also assisted a rape victim in that article. They also assisted in the corralling of a guy who had knives on him in that article as well. So it was a multifaceted unit. John Latanzio saying hello, by the way, says, Kenny, looking good, buddy. Good to see you, John. Thank you for your well wishes, John. Yes, I am feeling a lot better. Thank you very much. John, of course, a 5-truck and 3-truck, as I always like to say. So, that being said, the unit was continuing to evolve in the 80s. And you didn't have the heavy rescue truck like NYPD Emergency Service has, which you had a lot generally on those small satellite trucks, from basically the same tools that they would have in their REPs, minus the heavy weapons. So you did get MP5s later. So tell me about, even though it's a smaller truck compared to a heavier rescue truck, you still have a lot to learn. Tell me about mastering those tools aboard and just learning where they were. So if you were in a fast-paced situation, you knew where they were, you can get them to the guys that needed them.
Well, we, being part of the Transit Authority, we had a variety of vehicles. We didn't have the same standardization, fortunately, that the PD had, so that every vehicle, when you got it, the cabinetry was laid out the same way, the vehicle was laid out the same way. So depending on which one of the hours that you had that day, you just had to make sure that the stuff was there. But I got to say, probably the most unique thing that our people that, obviously came before me there, they mastered the use of the Paratech airbags, the air jacks that we used to lift the trains. And, people, when you say we would lift trains, you only need to lift the train a couple of inches, maybe. Sadly to say, when there's somebody's got a, piece of them stuck under a wheel, you don't need a lot of lift. But the greatest part of that stuff was actually when we had, you had mentioned earlier, space cases. Now, we know that there's not a lot of space between a train and a platform, and sadly, some people end up there. Some of the way we did things, and we utilized the Transit Authority Museum down in Gerolamo Street. We used that for training a lot. And the consistency of doing it over and over again, it was just a backbreaking event when you had one where you needed to lift the train, because there was so much equipment. And you were there, two guys, maybe, two EMRU guys, and maybe a post cop. And you had to lug all that stuff downstairs, and then, depending on how far down the platform or into the tunnel. So it was a challenge. But, and in the later years, then we were able to convince the Transit Authority that we should have tasers. And
that would help.
And we got the MP5s. And we were doing a lot more tunnel searches. These crimes, these events didn't just start. They would go on, they were going on forever. But we always had a call for NYPD, and they would come down and we would assist them to the best we could. If we didn't have the equipment that they had to do the job, well, we would have to kind of stand by. So we were able to convince the Transit Authority to spend some money and get some things. But it was a great run. I can't complain. Met some great people, still see them today even. But I think the time for the merge was the right time. Obviously, Chief Bratton, he knew how the system, he knew how we ran. He knew how we operated. And I guess from a business sense, it was a great move. I'm sure there were some people that didn't fare well, but he had said to us in the meeting, he's going to try not to let anybody get hurt. And you know what? He was a man to his word, as far as I could tell. And you know what? I think we all 50 or so of us landed on our feet pretty well with NYPD issue. And it was a great last quarter of my career in that department. One big happy family now. And as you had Steve Stefanakis on before, housing, they were a little bit smaller department, but big in their own way. And, they started up their own emergency service type unit. And like I said, when we all merged, all of a sudden there was a plethora of extra gear and extra men and women to start finding places for. And I think it worked out well. I may be wrong to some people, but I think it did.
Yeah, I think I would say so. John Bushing's actually here. He says, "Hey, Ken,
Ah,
looking good." So good to see you, John. Glad you're tuning in tonight. Scott, I think it's Scott Gallardi. If I got your last name mixed up, I'm sorry, buddy. He says, "Good evening, guys. Fellow original tunnel rat. Good to see you, Scott. Hope I got your last name right. If not, I got you mixed up with somebody else." Yeah, no, I think, and I'll get to that a little bit later. It did work out because, like I said, you're combining the expertise of two rescue units into one, compared with the housing guys and what they knew. Obviously, transit rescue and what you guys knew. And it's interesting because there's actually a clip on YouTube from that episode of Cops that featured transit where it's a man under job. And Franco's on it along with Mike Waster and Charlie Caperna. But also there is ESU from NYPD. And I think because he had blonde hair at the time, it looks like him from the back. It might have been John Politoski and his crew from Two Truck. And also Housing Rescue's there assisting with the train lift. So there, even though Housing Rescue wasn't around that long, there were jobs in that 8-month span that they were all 3 rescue units were on the scene.
Yep, that occurred. We all crossed paths now. In fact, John Poldowski, he was in the EMRU and went over in one of the lateral moves when we still had the 3 different tests. They had the different hiring lists. He went over to NYPD and he ended up there in ESU.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Good guy, of course. Might have killed a rat, but that's neither here nor there. And
is that a rat or a bat?
I love you, John. I can't.
Another famous job.
Yeah. Him and the late Pat Murphy. There's a guy I would have loved to have had on this show. Pat Murphy, a funny one by all accounts. Good man out of 2, 5, and 6 truck, who's not with us anymore, sadly. Died of 9/11 cancer a number of years ago. But he lives on through that Cops clip because that was hilarious. It's like, and he's all nonchalant in the beginning, heading to the job. Yeah, we're going over to Amsterdam Avenue. Lady had a rat in an apartment. I'm like, what? So that's New York for you. Stephanakis has, and your original Housing Rescue guys, and he brought this up also when Franco was on, were trained by transit in the very beginning. You guys actually trained them.
Yes. The ESU STS class may have had a group going through already. It just didn't work out for the timing, and they apparently didn't, strike while the strike is hot. Housing Authority, I guess, said yes, you can do this, and I guess they didn't want to wait, so they brokered a deal with our guys, and may he rest in peace, Sergeant Richie Locke and some of the other guys. They put together a training syllabus. And we had we helped the housing become who they ended up being there in their own rescue unit. A bunch of good guys there, and again, we were 3 separate departments, 3 separate rescue emergency service type units, and there was little bits and pieces of stuff that went on back in those days. But after the merge and people got to know each other and work with each other, and sadly die around each other. We're one family now, and I think you've been talking to some of the other guys, and they talk about the Retired Emergency Man's Association, and it's great that we can still laugh about it, talk about it, sometimes even cry about it. But it's a good network and a good family.
Yeah, it's a good blend. I do feel like, you guys were kind of, and Shanahan talked about this last episode from the housing perspective, you guys were kind of just getting started. Because I think, look, in hindsight, both departments were very much ahead of their time in that you guys had federal money with the accreditation. And with that, it allotted you the ability to kind of use things that were still relatively new to the profession of policing. And to do that in New York City was very groundbreaking, to where I would have liked to have seen, like I said before, even if the merge still had to happen, and I understand both sides of the coin, I would have liked to have seen transit and housing at least get a little bit of a crack at the 21st century and what they could have done in the early 2000s as technology continued to progress and the profession continued to change. But just to go back for a second, how did rescue school work back then? Did transit have their own STS when you came on in '84? Did you have to go to the NYPD's STS?
Yes and no.
Okay.
We did not necessarily have an STS type of a school in transit. Again, our claim to fame was the airbags. So you spent days and days and days practicing with that, because again, sometimes, sadly, a lot of times a person is deceased. But a lot of times they're still alive, and you can't be fumbling around. You got to know how to do it and how to do it quick and safely to extricate them from wherever they may be on a train. And we've actually I had a number of occasions using them on cars where people got run over and were stuck and trapped underneath the car. And when you get proficient in like a tool like that, because we didn't have a hearse tool. So we did a lot of things manually. And again, too, you tried your best with the airbag, hoping that you would hear, an Atom car in the distance getting there quickly. So you could help them out. Because a lot of times you're riding around in a truck and you just come upon, 53, car accidents. But then we were able to, through some of the networking with the transit guys that were there and the folks from over at the STS school, which wasn't as long as it is today. My goodness, today it's almost
8 months.
Yeah, it's I don't know how they do it, but it's great that they're getting so much more training and a lot more technology, as you said. But so we got put in with their STS class that they had been going through, and we had a modified schedule. We didn't need to go for this day, or we went for that day and stuff like that, and it worked out nicely. Got to meet some great guys then. Sergeant Al Baker at the time, he was running the RMI part of it, and I ended up in 10 truck, and we had an RMI there. He's a great guy. I know he's a retired lieutenant, and I'll see him in another week. But so we got a mix and match kind of a training with that, and many of us had been EMTs already, so that worked out good for ourselves. And then we also did get to go to EMT school with the PD. We'll go for a refresher course if we were expiring on the certification and such. But Chief Bratton, when he came to town, obviously he had a goal, and some of us didn't understand what the heck is this accreditation thing. But it was a drive to get us on the map, and he was successful in many things. Number one being the clocks. Governor Mario Cuomo at the time, he went and he lobbied him, and the governor came across with a check, and we started getting out the clocks, which again, late 80s, early 90s, when police officers were being shot in gun battles, and sadly, trying to reload, a revolver was difficult, and there was, the outcry for, we only have 6 shots to begin with, so why can't we have these other ones? So he was a trailblazer then, and had he stayed, who knows where we'd be today,
Right.
as that goes.
That's a good point. I think Scott Goodell kind of changed that when he was killed in 1986, because that's how he died. He was trying to reload in the middle of a shootout, and
I think that was out in the Rockaways. Yeah,
and killed him.
It was tough to get the departments to break away from even the dump pouches to go to speed loaders. A proven worthy item for $10 could save your life because you could reload quicker. And yeah.
Yeah, very much. No, and again, talk about a guy who was ahead of his time. Even the patrol vehicles, he changed them up. I think he got you guys the Chevy Caprices.
He despised the old Chevy Suburbans. They're not the luxury Suburbans that we know today. I'll tell you
Right.
that. Yeah, they were a challenge. But not to say that the K car was a high point of the.
No, guys did not like the K
Fortunately,
car.
we did not have them. But
No.
Yeah.
Not a pleasant vehicle to have to drive around. You mentioned perp searches earlier, and I remember talking about this with Joe Cascio, because that's daunting in that it's dark. You also have the third rail. They're not shutting it off at that time. You don't know where this guy is. And yeah, you have the vest and you have the weapons, but anybody could sneak off and get that one crazy shot that, puncher's chance, right? So I imagine you were on plenty of those. Tell me about some of the more memorable ones that stick out.
Well, not only was it dark, electrified, but for the most part, the perps knew the tunnel. Let's face it, we didn't know every tunnel everywhere in the system. So you never that when the system was built, they built for the future, and they had so many cutouts and so many rooms and so many areas that were going to be used for expansion over the years. And I think one of the more memorable ones was we did a perp search, and as we were doing a perp search, we came upon a family, a mother and a father and a child, 5-6 year old child. They were actually living in a room within the system somewhere, and it was, we're glad that we got the perp, but we also were able to find, a family living in the subway, and not that anything's changed that much today, because there's still plenty of homeless and they're living in the subway, but that was a tough one. But it was, you stood there and you looked in this room, and you go, my goodness, they actually called this home, and it, couch, a refrigerator, things like that. It was like, it was truly, truly memorable, to say the least, in that regard.
Are they renting?
I'm surprised the TA didn't go after them for theft of services, for not paying rent. But it was a shame. It was a terrible shame, to see that.
I'll say. We're talking with Ken Schnetzler, retired NYPD Emergency Service Unit Officer Special Assignment with the New York City Transit Police, originally with the Emergency Medical Rescue Unit, and later on the NYPD Emergency Service Unit. With Galena Sereno's here, of course. Shout out to my man Scotty Wagner. He's here. Billy Ryan from the Arson Explosion Squad, and of course the co-creator and co-executive producer of Tales from the Boom Room, my miniseries on the NYPD Bomb Squad and NYPD Arson Explosion Squad. And Aaron Cook's here. And I think did I mention Sammy Peters? I think I did, but I'm going to mention you again. I don't care. Aaron Cook has a question. It's not a dumb question, Aaron. Don't worry. Sometimes I wonder this too. I forget what it stands for. What's an RMI? I know it's a robot, but what's the exact terminology?
Remote Mobile Investigator.
Okay. Yeah. Right as you said that, Patty Bogan came in and said that's what it was. Yeah, right. You're reading our minds, Patty. Good to see you. Hope all's well on your end as well.
Yeah. Fortunately, again, so in emergency service, each of the various trucks have a specialty piece of equipment. Like in our case, in 10 truck, we had one of the RMIs. So, we got to practice a lot with that. We had some real good guys that knew that stuff. And, constantly we'd pull the truck out, take it out and practice with it and all. And it was that was probably a groundbreaking piece of equipment compared to what, now what you see on the news and on the different shows with these completely remote things. This had a cable attached, and but it was an interesting thing. It was an overtime tool. Generally speaking, if you got called out on that, you weren't coming back for a few hours, and if it was towards the end of the tour, it worked out nice.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, Al Baker was on the show a while back in May, and he talked about it. And I know John DeLera had a huge hand in kind of rewriting how it was utilized. And it's funny because in the episode of Cops where they filmed in New York City, that introduction, which I'll sometimes use as well, you could see him. You can't see his face, but I know it's him based off the hairstyle. And it says E2 RMI, and he was the master of it in Truck 2. He's driving it. It's hilarious. It's this little machine. It's from 1994 or so, but look at how much it was getting done back then. And speaking of 1994, we go to this episode of Cops. We go to one Mr. Ken Schnetzler, who was featured in an emergency call involving him and his lieutenant, Charlie Caperna, involving a stabbing call specifically. We'll see you in a few minutes. Enjoy it.
My unit is responsible for any emergencies that arise on the transit system. Basically, we're called when the average officer on the patrol can't handle it. I got 3 or 4 trucks, sometimes 5 and 6 trucks, covering the 4 boroughs where a few years back we were covering the same amount of territory with 2 trucks. So coverage, we're out there. Getting around, like Kenny said, getting through these streets sometime.
I say if you drove a Humvee through the streets of New York City, after 2 years, they would fall apart too. They can keep giving us new vehicles, the best that they have to offer. But between the potholes and the stop-and-go traffic and other people hitting you, a tank would fall apart in a couple of years.
Northbound train. Got a report from Fifth Wire.
Stabbing there?
Yeah, we're getting a mass
Person stabbed at the station.
Stabbing there.
Stay off the air, Katie. Unit with the priority only.
young man is stabbing to the stomach, part of his bowel hanging out, which makes it a fairly serious wound. Take care of the crowd.
How you doing? Where you stabbed at?
We're going to St. Vincent's. We're out of here now. Just open up a hole and we're going to go. Let's just go. Watch out. We got to get out of here. I don't know the circumstances of the stabbing, but it's a fairly serious wound. So we're going to get him upstairs, work on him up in the ambulance.
Where'd he get stabbed?
They came off the train car. They were on the front train. The guy was punched across the head. I think that went on the guy was stabbed in his stomach. There's a big fight. There's a girl on the ground. I don't know if he got stuck on the platform in the midst of the whole thing.
No calling? Paul, who's it, Paul? The danger level is always there. It's magnified to a point that you don't know who's who. You don't know what's going on. You were down there. You seen what happens. You got 100 people around you. You don't know who's looking to hurt you. We're down here to help them. And again, at the same time, protect your own back.
A lot of people see the blue uniform. They don't know that we're there to help the victim. And they may be an adversary of the victim to begin with, so now we're their adversary.
We got you.
Sorry, I think I had a little technical difficulty there.
No problem. So you saw that call. I mean, that was very, very chaotic. And that obviously you have his girlfriend there. She's distraught. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to make fun of her. I understand why she was distraught. But if I got stabbed and I don't know what's worse, either the stab wound or I got somebody screaming my ear off over here, So on top of that, obviously everybody, it's the car wreck syndrome. You want to look, you want to see what's going on. It's just a lot to handle. But you guys were able to work with that pretty well. I imagine that was one of the things you trained for. A lot of people on the platform. Pure chaos, but you still got to operate in an environment like that.
Well, as you can tell by the time of the day, it was right at the letting out of school, and from what we had gathered after the scene was quieted down, it was two schools. It was again a beef that a couple of people had, and as you can see, it was quite the crowded platform. Fortunately, that was 14th and 8th, so. We had the district wasn't too far away. PD post cops were there, so we did have a lot of blue suiters there to help deflect some of the crowd for us to help work. And that was actually the first hour of the first day that the cops crew was out with us, and they were overwhelmed with. Can't believe this! I can't believe this! Can't believe this! Well,
believe
you're
it.
in New York City, and they got a good amount of footage. I can't believe how many times that was on, and I would get phone calls from people. Hey, I saw you on Cops Again. You're on Cops Again. Yeah, I know. Didn't get residuals, but it was interesting that they chose the transit police to do, and then I believe there was a second one, and then they also did NYPD issue a couple of times as well. So, there's a number of us that got our 15 minutes of fame out of that TV show.
Yeah, Glenn Klein from Ten Truck, who you worked with later on, of course. He was also in an episode where he had, and I played that clip when he was on a great rescue on an overturned vehicle call, him and the other guys from Ten Truck, and Tommy Rowe, who they were filming with. They were riding with Tommy Rowe.
Yep.
And with that, with Transit, I know the episode itself debuted on January 1st of 1994. When did they film that with you guys, though? Was it fall of 93?
It was probably right after school went back into session. So,
so late
September,
summer.
October, I can't remember the date. It was pretty much Charlie Caperna tapped me on the shoulder. Hey, you're going to ride with me today. Okay. He said, "Oh yeah, we got this film crew, blah blah blah." And okay, we took him in the backseat. We used the supervisor's car. It was a big old Caprice station wagon. Had a fair amount of equipment in it, but the the having the second seat in the, for the film crew is what was needed. So
Right.
yeah, they were pleased with the footage that they were able to get. And then they went on to do some other great jobs. They did a great thing with the decoy unit. And then, like you said, there was a nice man on the job with Franco Baraducci and Mike Wacer, a couple other guys.
Yeah, I felt bad for Mike there because he's a sergeant on scene. Obviously, Charlie's the lieutenant. He's the most senior of the bunch. But Mike, as a sergeant, you can see him sweating bullets. And we got to get out of here. I don't envy poor Mike in that situation, but he did a good job. He did a good job tending to the guy and, of course, getting him up and tending to the girlfriend, too, who obviously and understandably, like I said earlier, was very despondent and distraught. So that brings us to April of 95. Excuse me. And the merge happens. You go out to 10 truck. Was it your choice to go to 10 truck?
Yes. Fortunately, like everything else, that and vacation picks went by seniority. So I was fortunate. I was pretty high up in seniority in the EMRU when we merged, and they split us up into two groups, and they gave you, they said, fill out this dream sheet, and we'll see what we can do for you. So fortunately, I landed in 10 truck, and it was great. It was a good crew.
Yeah, very good crew. Crew. Hugh, Steph, of course, Richie Winwood, Klein. I think Ray Denninger was in 10 truck.
Ray Denninger.
Tom Langone.
Quite a few seasoned veterans that had, been in the issue for quite a while, on the job for quite a while. So it was good. But funny story was my first I wanted to work midnights, and so my first midnight tour rolled out to a barricaded EDP. And I was working with a very seasoned police officer. I won't mention his name in case he's watching. But so we get to the scene, and the duty captain was there, who's still on the job in a high position. So my partner there for that night says to the captain, "All right, Cap, we're going to do it like we always do it." And so I looked at him and I said, "Really? This is my first job with you. So you want to fill me in? What do you want to do first?" So, it was a little bit of that groundbreaking, sort of thing that we all probably went through, some a few more times than others.
Right.
But you know what? At the end of the tour, you laugh about it. And you know what? That's what keeps us together today, with those of us that are still, seeing each other, is that camaraderie of dealing with what we had to deal with. It's sometimes it's not an easy tour, and that was a funny little story, if you might say.
No, of course. It's interesting in terms of where you were in your career at that point. You'd been a cop in New York City a long time, 14 years. You've been a rescue cop in New York City just about as long, 11 years. But still, it's a new unit in that, not that you hadn't handled above ground jobs in transit rescue before, but it's an entirely different way of doing things with NYPD Emergency Service. And they have the history to back them up. This is a unit that's been around by that point when you came in, 65 years in 1995. Right. A great history that preceded it. So learning how to do things the NYPD way, did you at times in 95, 96, 97 kind of feel like a rookie all over again?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
And did you at times in 95, 96, 97, when the merge was still relatively new, kind of feel like a rookie all over again in ESU?
Oh, yeah. Again, there was that many more. Well, again, in transit, we only had one location. So you didn't have 10 different units, 10 trucks, and people all there. So it took a while to start learning, names of people and outside of your command. And then again, working midnights, you're in a kind of like a selected group, so to say. You don't see the day tour and the PM guys except for a few minutes. You're not generally running on jobs with them. So, you got to know the same midnight guys from the various trucks, especially too when you flew. But it was like getting used to it all over again. But, like I said, pre 9/11, it was a different city. It was a different job. It was a different world, obviously. But, everybody had their own little thing, and for the most part, everybody assimilated well, and we were, we were welcomed.
Yeah, I think it ended up working out great. And that's the thing that I don't think you guys did that in transit. Stephen Stefanakis, he still feels like a rookie, he says. You see that by comment from Steph? I don't know if you can make it out.
I didn't hear what?
He said he still feels like a rookie, says Stefanakis via LinkedIn, of course. Appreciate you tuning in, Steph. I think it was good because, I don't know, in transit rescue, you guys did, you had districts with different trucks and whatnot and separate places to store equipment. But I don't think you were flying from district to district, from rescue truck to rescue truck.
No. No matter where we were physically located, and we did move around a few times in the time that I was there. I started out, we were at Gold Street, downtown Brooklyn. Then we moved to the new District 2 that was coming online, and it was in the condominium building over by Canal Street, and we were in the basement, and but it was a district as well. Then we moved out to I was in the District 33 outdoors when they finally moved into the subway, and then we got that building. So no matter where we were physically located, that's where everybody went to turn out, and that's where all the vehicles were. So there was no such thing as flying. We probably didn't even know what that was unless we knew guys in the ESU and they would talk about it. But we never really experienced that sort of thing.
So it must have been one of the positive developments of the merger, getting the chance to not only work in ESU, but also fly to other trucks, see how they do things, get to know the guys, and get to build that camaraderie that's made ESU one of the things that's made ESU so famous. Yeah,
when you flew, you generally were taken care of. When you got there, you were probably assigned to be the officer in charge of the truck. Because when you're flying, it's generally because there's a shortage of manpower at one place, and there's extra guys in another truck. So the roll call person discusses it with the supervisors, and they say, all right, get a guy from 10 truck, fly him over to 2 truck. There's no sergeant working, so you'll sit on that side. So basically, you were taken care of for the night. If you had jobs you had to run out on, you went out. But if you're in the truck, you would pretty much stay back at quarters, taking care of business there. And but yeah, the good thing about it was you got to meet other ESU guys. You got to learn other parts of the city, which was good.
Yeah, of course. We'll hit on a few more things. And before I get to those few things I want to hit on, Scotty G, I'll just call you Scotty G, so I don't get your last name wrong. It says, when did EMRU go to the EBQ Old District 33? He wants to know.
When? Maybe 1990. I wouldn't know. I can't remember.
Yeah, interesting transition, of course. So, I remember talking about this with Glenn. Forgive the voice, guys. Still kind of dealing with the after effects of COVID. You have the MVAs, of course, nearby because you're near the bridges. You also have the EDPs, those who may want to jump. Do you recall any particular rescue, either from an accident or saving somebody from jumping during that time frame that most sticks out all these years later?
Sadly, no. Most of our jumpers in the transit system, you have a number of bridges that have trains, and you have a number of elevated structures. And do I need to explain? They get to be very gruesome. So we'll leave it at that.
Yep.
So many of the times it was, after the fact.
Right, which is always kind of unfortunate. You also had in Queens, obviously, you have the airports, and this is interesting, and I don't talk about this a lot, which shame on me because I should. You have 3 airports, I believe. You have Kennedy, you have LaGuardia. I think it's just those 2, right? Kennedy and LaGuardia.
Those 2, and then Newark and Jersey.
Newark and Jersey, of course. So you have those 2. You have Shea Stadium back then, now Citi Field, of course. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you work in security details for the Mets, especially when they were in the playoffs in the late 90s and 2000, 1999, 2000. And also on top of that, the U.S. Open. Of course, tennis Open every year in August. So that time frame, I imagine, especially that 1999-2000 period, and like I said, when the Mets were going on those deep playoff runs, you guys were very busy. You must have been loving the overtime back then.
Yes. Well, Also, too, I'll just go back to the first officer that I worked with. He was great. Shortly after that job, we would take the big truck out, and we would go over to Shea Stadium's parking lot, and he would just have me backing up in between all the lines and just keep backing up the truck. He says, you can see where you're going forward, but the backing up is the hard part. So that was a great training. But we were fortunate. We had in 2000 we had the Subway Series, so you had overtime at both Citi Field and Shea Stadium and Yankee Stadium, and you would roll out of you would roll from the U.S. Open to then hopefully the playoffs and the World Series again. Like in 2000, we had that, and then you had the UN General Assembly. So you kind of sacrificed your family time and you went out and you did as much overtime as you could, and fortunately, being there in Queens, we were luckily to get more overtime per se than if it was the Yankees playing in the Bronx units would get more of the overtime and so on. So it was dished out pretty fairly. But if the Mets and the Yankees were in it, you certainly were going to get some overtime out of it.
And this year they both kind of had that, both 9 and 10 truck and 3 and 4 truck, because both teams were in the playoffs. So generally you had, a lot to go around there, even though the Yankees lasted longer in the playoffs than the Mets did. Hopefully if they're able to have a deep playoff run on the Mets end, and today they made a big signing with Verlander in 2023. A lot of those guys in Queens will definitely get some good OT out of that, which I'm rooting for. So that might have been, my God, before I get to your retirement, 2000, that might have been the greatest year for you career-wise in terms of the salary, because the regular duty, of course, to pay for that. And then, like you said, Open, UNGA, and then the playoffs for both teams in the Subway Series. You were raking in the dough there, my friend. Oh, my goodness. So I guess, getting to August of 2001, that's when you retired. When did you start thinking about it?
Well, again, it was a whole different set of circumstances. It was. I probably decided that it was going to be 20 and out. I would go find something to do. I certainly could figure out I could do other things, and being young enough, and again the opportunity that the job afforded us to leave after 20 years with a half your pension and health benefits was a good incentive. The other thing was the variable supplement fund, which not everybody got it because of a certain time frame, a cutoff date that they only started giving it to the people that retired. But back then, if you didn't retire, you didn't get that year's variable supplement. And one of the nicer things, or one of the smarter moves the department did was Commissioner Kelly, after 9/11, he lobbied the city to allow guys to bank the variable supplement. So if you stayed past 20, you could put that money into an account. They would hold that for you. One of the other nice things he did was he gave out the detective shields to a lot of guys, deservedly so. To keep people that had experience, and those were two of the key things I believe he did that kept people like Stephanakis around for so long, and so many others. It was a nice incentive. So it was a matter of finances, really. And you know what? I had my share of scrapes and bruises and a one fractured bone. And 20 and out, I'll go find something to do. I was still young enough, and the rest is history.
Yeah, well, you've done well for yourself, obviously, and since then, since leaving in the summer of 2001. Just a quick note on these two guys. I think Paul Talty got to you guys in 10 truck in 98. I know he graduated STS class in 98. Maybe he was in emergency about that same amount of time. Tommy Langone was an E-man forever, and he was there when you got there with the merger in 1995. What do you remember most about those two guys?
Paul was quiet, laid back, and Tommy was he was just full of energy. He was very, very knowledgeable in rescue type work. He was a volunteer, and Yeah, it was. They were a couple of good guys. Everybody was good guys, but you know what? They were really good guys, and you could learn a lot from Tommy. He never hesitated to show you something. Um, I probably interacted with him more than Paul, just because of squads and whatnot that we were working opposite and all. But yeah, they're a couple of good guys. Couple of good guys.
Very solid guys. They represented 10 truck well. And the photo of them, I wish I have it. I don't for some reason, but I remember seeing it a number of years back. I don't know who took it, but this is the morning of. They're slapping on Scott packs and loading up the heavy rescue truck to head down there. That's the last photo of them, ever taken. But it's a test. They don't look nervous. They look very calm. They look like they're just getting ready to go do their job, and that's what they went and did.
Yep.
That morning. And I think it's a testament to the unit, not just those two guys in 10 truck, but the unit as a whole. Nothing excitable. You don't see their eyes big like that. They're just very calmly doing what they need to do. So when you look back at your career, like I said in the introduction, and then we can get to the rapid fire, interesting gamut. 20 years, a lot to be proud of. Transit police, that was a lot of fun, especially in EMRU and the rescue unit. And obviously the last 6 years in emergency service. What are you proudest of in your career?
Well, again, I was very fortunate. I had a guardian angel probably looking over me. And you look back at some of the things you did, some of the risks that you took with, your partners and whatnot. And some of the things that we did, and you say to yourself, wow, it wouldn't have taken much for that to go the wrong way.
Right.
So, I look back at that, but one of the redeeming features of my life and my career have been my post 9/11 career has kept me busy and constantly working with and bumping into guys guys and gals, and when I say guys, I mean everybody. Working with and getting doing things with guys that have been retired, came through PD, emergency service, transit, whatever the case may be, and so many of the. In fact, Johnny Lampkin, one of the names. I think you've interviewed Kenny Winkler,
Yep,
and so many others. Our paths have probably crossed as much now in retirement and working in our own areas than when we were probably on the job together. So what's great is you can go to a meeting, 100 people, and you can find the one guy or the one gal that you were on the job. Yeah, okay, blah blah blah, and you start reminiscing, and then you realize who they were. And so I find that's been. It's been a great part of a great success of my success of what I've been doing since I left the job, and it's worked out well for everybody. That there's that quiet network out there. The guys are still involved in different things, different agencies, different businesses, and whether you're getting a phone call or a text. Do you know somebody that knows somebody who knows somebody? Yeah, I do. Or you're doing the same thing to them. Hey, I need this or I need that. All right, give me a day. I'll get back to you. So It's a great network. It's a great brotherhood, sisterhood that we've had over the years. And it's great that we still have guys that are still on the job that, keep the flame burning. And again, like I said earlier, the Retired Emergency Man's Association is again, I run into guys that retired before I came on the job, and that's like an amazing longevity, testament to that.
Of course, no, and I'm a member of Irma, and I'm very thankful for that. And I think I can say this now that we've hit volume 30 of this miniseries, and I know I've said this before, and I apologize if I sound like a broken record to the audience, but I appreciate you guys peeling back the curtain for me and allowing me a glimpse into, and all the guys from ESU, NYPD, from housing rescue, from transit rescue, giving me a look inside, well, as you just said, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, because I get it, I'm an outsider, but you guys have welcomed me with open arms, and I really do appreciate that, because I genuinely do love the history of the unit, well, the department as a whole, but especially that unit, and to have gotten to have chronicled so many of you guys over the last year or so, and hear the different stories of the different trucks and the many amazing jobs you guys have had. it's been a lot of fun. It's been a real blessing. It's not really much more I could say to sum it up, but man, I've seen that camaraderie, and it's a great thing to behold. You hit the nail on the head.
Well, thank you for reaching out again. For some of the other guys that you've interviewed, everybody has said that you were a straight up guy, and appreciate the fact that you know so much is a testament to what you've been doing with yourself.
Well, thank you. I learned from talking to you guys. The more I talk to you guys, the more educated I get. And before I get to the rapid fire, Joe Maliga, retired correctional officer, him and I, for those of you in the audience, you know this, it's a running joke. He wants me to ask you, have you ever delivered a baby?
Yes. As a
there you
matter
go,
of
Joe.
Fact, her birthday is coming up. December 26, 1984, 14th Street and 8th Avenue.
Okay.
Wouldn't know her today if I bumped into her because once again, we showed up. We took care of business. It was one of those situations, I believe it was a third or fourth child. And as we know, usually after the first one, the second, third, fourth, whatever, comes quicker. And they probably failed to time it right. And we ended up delivering the baby on a L train in the terminal there at 8th Avenue, 14th Street. And we wrapped the baby after we delivered it. And EMS showed up. And then the post cop rode with the mother, the baby, and the father to St. Vincent's, and then got his name and picture in the newspaper. But the gentleman I worked with, who, matter of fact, just spoke with him the other day, Sergeant. He was a police officer then, John White. He and I, we know what we did. And again, 1984, December 26th, the day after Christmas.
There you go. That person will be turning 38 years old very soon. And before I get to the rapid fire, Steph says, great show. Good job, guys. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Steph, very much for tuning in. And thanks to everybody for tuning in tonight for this volume 30. Now for the rapid fire. And this is 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You could say pass if you want. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. The first one. Between the transit REP and, of course, the NYPD Emergency Service REP and the big truck, favorite tool on the truck. And you can't say Hearst tool because everyone says that.
Airbags.
That makes sense. Airbags, you mentioned it earlier. The second one, Joe Maliga already covered, so how can I replace the second one? All right, well, second one. In place of the babies question, Joe, most uplifting call you ever responded to?
The most what?
Uplifting.
Gentleman I worked with, known for most of my adult life, Tom Bender. He and I had a space case where a lady's foot was twisted between the train and the platform, and obviously in a lot of pain. It was up in I think Lenox Avenue, one of the stations up there, and we brought the equipment down. I think it was Tommy got underneath the train. We did the airbag, and we removed her in a matter of moments, and the platform erupted in a roar of clapping and hooting and hollering for us that we saved one of their neighbors' foot. And it was a good job. But it was just one of them quick bang bang boom, and it was out. And but it was nice, back in the 80s for the riders to applaud your work.
There you go. Mr. Esterman's idea paid off, 7 years after the fact. There you go. That rescue was made. Third, funniest call you ever responded to?
Funniest call. Can I come back to it?
Yeah, that's fine. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Cozy Soup and Burger.
Where's that located?
8th Broadway and 8th Street. Okay. I was again the gentleman I just mentioned, Tommy Bender. We had a collar. I got stuck with a collar in the EMRU. It was not too common to take a collar, and he went out and got a couple of burgers and a cup of pea soup, and he challenged me to put my spoon in the pea soup, and it actually stood up. and he brought that back to District 4, and probably the best one I ever had, and been going there for years afterwards. So yeah, Cozy Soup and Burger in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, soup and a burger. I can go for that anytime. Say less. And fifth and finally, and you can come back to the funniest call question if you have one. And if not, that's fine. What advice would you give anybody coming on the job now? And I'm going to tweak the question a little bit. You know, you were in emergency rescue work a long time, 17 of your 20 years. If you can grab somebody right out of the STS and give them some advice, what would you tell them?
Somebody right out of STS would probably have, 5-6 years on the job. So they're not a rookie cop, but you're a rookie in the new, in that new world of emergency service work. And I would say to them, listen, man, just, listen, person, whatever. Just listen to the seasoned officers and watch what they do. Watch them and watch them interacting with each other. Listen to how they interact with each other, and especially with the bosses. You're a grunt. You answer to a boss. That guy answers to a boss. That gal answers to a boss. Always make their job a little bit easier, so they make your day a little bit easier. Seek out the old timers, the seasoned cops there, and they may not want to be bothered, but you know what? Deep down inside, they do. They wanna share their experience. They want to share their expertise, and even if it's a matter of just showing you a little trick, how to keep your coffee from spilling off the dashboard or something,
There you go. Any advice is always sound. And if you have people that have as much experience as some of the people that you worked with, how could you not want to listen to them? If you don't want to listen to them, then something's wrong with you.
Yeah. Again, I'm going to be privileged to be at an event in another week or so. There's going to be probably 1,500 or 2,000 years of experience. When you get 100 or so people together that did 20 or more years, it's a lot of years of experience. My math may be off a little bit, but there's a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge in that room. So that's one of the great things we look forward to.
I'll be tied up because my calendar's jam-packed this month with a bunch of different things. But one of these days, I think my goal is to finally get down to Floyd Bennett Field for the Rima Day next April. So if I don't, unless there's a gathering before then, that's a little bit closer to me. Hopefully, I see all of you at Floyd Bennett Field.
Mark your calendar, last Saturday in April every year.
Yep, the last Saturday in April. We're finally, hopefully by then the weather will be nice. It'll be nice and sunny out. We'll get a beautiful 75-degree day, one would think.
Yep.
And get the chance to finally meet all of you in person. So stick around, Ken. We'll say goodbye off the air. Thanks for being here. Coming up, and thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast. No show tomorrow, no show Friday or next Monday, but there is one show left. This is going to be another milestone volume of a different miniseries. And I've been working to get this interview for a long time. So I'm happy it's finally going to happen. Volume 35 of the best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. He's written 9 books, came onto the FDNY in 1957, finished up as a deputy chief in 1999. Vinny Dunn. If you know a thing or two about the fire service in New York City, you know the name Vinny Dunn. He's in particular an expert on collapse rescue, having been present for the 23rd Street fire in 1966, which sadly killed, 12 FDNY firefighters. So Vinny Dunn, Chief Vinny Dunn, next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Volume 35 of The Best, the Bravest, and that's the last show of the year and the last show for a while. I'll elaborate on that as we get closer. In the meantime, on behalf of Ken Schnetzler, I am Mike Colón. This has been Volume 30 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. We will see you next time, and as the E-Men like to say, anytime, baby. Take care. Have a great rest of the night.
Thank you.